I'm sorry for all that I've done. I'm just a sinner, saved by your love. Though I'm broken, you make me strong. Well, I'm only human, with help from above. You called my name, forever I'm healed by grace. Whenever I fall, you're always waiting for me. Oh, you're waiting for me. Every day I need you, Jesus. You are the Savior, you are the healer, you'll always be. Every day I need you, Jesus. You are the Savior, you are the healer, you'll always be. When I'm sinking, you help me breathe. Through every moment, you stand with me. You called my name, forever I'm healed by grace. Whenever I fall, you're always waiting for me. Oh, you're waiting for me. Every day I need you, Jesus. You are the Savior, you are the healer, you'll always be. Every day I need you, Jesus. You are the Savior, you are the healer, you'll always be. Though I walked away, you came to find me. I lost my way, still you forgave me. I felt your grace, now I'm running home to you. Though I walked away, you came to find me. I lost my way, still you forgave me. I felt your grace, now I'm running home to you. Where you're waiting for me. Every day I need you, Jesus. You are the Savior, you are the healer, you're
Hey, good evening and welcome to our Grosvenor online service. My name is Travis and it's amazing that you can join us on this. We've got Graham speaking in a moment, but just to tell you a few things that are going on this week. We have the gathering next week, so on Sunday we have the gathering which will be at the Queen's Theatre if you want to come along, if you can come along, and that's where all three of our congregations come and enjoy time just fellowshipping and just celebrating who Jesus is, and it's going to be an amazing time. It's our first one that we've had for a long time, but important to know that there will be no coffee served there, so bring a travel mug or support the local businesses, and it'll be great to see you there. And also just to let you know that Elevate, we are going to be having our fourth one, not next week on the Sunday, it won't be there, but the week after, the 31st, we will be having our fourth Elevate service, and it's been an amazing time of just encountering Jesus, and we have already seen lives transformed. It's been an amazing time, and that's our 20s to 30s service, but it's not exclusively to 20s and 30s, so if you want to come along, check it out, please do. It's really been an amazing time. And that starts at 5:30, and we start off with a bit of just a fellowship, just hanging out and connecting with coffees and just chatting amongst people and getting to know new friends, and that's been amazing. And if this is your first time that you've connected with Grosvenor online, or you've never been to a service, or you're kind of new, then we do have a website, and you can find pretty much everything that you need to on that. And if you're struggling, then there are so many emails that you can email. Yeah, it's very easy to navigate. That's what we've got kind of coming up and what's happening. I hope you enjoy the service, and I'll catch you in a moment.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my turn till I met you. You called my name and I ran out like rain. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Thank you, Lord. Now your freedom is all that I know. Beyond made new, Jesus, when I met you, you called my name and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. It's your glorious day. Thank you, Lord. It's your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, but you called me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air that I breathe in. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you call my name, shout it out, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. We run into your glorious day, Lord. Into your arms. Thank you, Lord. We worship you, Lord. We worship you, Lord. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. If I were to ask you to choose a metaphor to describe your life, I wonder what you would choose. Maybe like Forrest Gump, if you've seen the film, you'd say that life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get next. Or if you were to ask John Bunyan, he would probably say life is a journey. From, as he described it in his famous book, the city of destruction to the city of God. And we're never safe until we get home. And that metaphor is a biblical metaphor, except the Bible doesn't talk about a journey so much as a race. And when we think about a race, we have different types of races, a sprint, or in reality, the Christian life is described more as a marathon. It doesn't get easier as you go on, and it's a grueling race, but there is a completing line in the distance. It was in 1968 that in the Olympics in Mexico City, a runner called Stephen Akhwari from Tanzania came in last. But about the halfway point of this marathon, he'd fallen and he'd seriously injured his leg, dislocating it. But he got up and he had the gumption to continue. Most people would have given up at that stage, but courageously he kept going, limping across the finishing line about an hour after the winner had come through. And when he was interviewed afterwards, the interviewer was perplexed as to why he bothered to pick himself up and keep going only to come in last position. This is what he said, rather perplexed. He replied, "I don't think you understand. My country didn't send me 7,000 miles to start the race. They sent me 7,000 miles to finish the race." You see, there's one thing to start. It's a different thing to finish. It's one thing to start out on the Christian race, but starting is not the important thing. The important thing is crossing the finishing line. Maybe it's because I'm getting older and everybody's asking me if I'm retired, but I'm increasingly focused on that finishing line. I don't want to stumble across it. I want to try and storm across it. But whatever, I want to keep on going, not be disqualified before I get there. And I can assure you, as I've said, that a marathon does not get easier the longer you run it. It actually gets tougher and harder as you near the completing line. We've come to the last talk in our series this month on the character of Gideon. We've been looking in the book of Judges, and the metaphor is very appropriate when we look at the end section of his life today in chapter 8 in particular. And if you've got a Bible, you want to be turning to it. He started out courageously. We saw that a couple of weeks ago, even though he was diffident, even though he was full of self-doubt. God used him, and we saw him last week observing and participating in some dramatic miracles that take place in front of his eyes. And he has now become a respected leader of the nation, so much so that now in chapter 8 of Judges and in verse 22, the men of Israel come to him and they say to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, for you've saved us from the hand of Midian." And what follows that verse is probably the greatest moment in his life, where he declines their adulation. And he says, "No, I'm not going to rule over you, and my son is not going to rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And in the very next breath, he stumbles off his pedestal from the greatest moment of his life to make probably the greatest mistake of his life. We'll come back to that in a moment, because I want to rewind. I want to pick up the narrative at the beginning of chapter 8, if you've got your Bibles open. And we left him last week, if you were with us, chasing after the retreating Midianites and their 135,000 grumpy camels. Remember that? And so he's chasing after the remnant of the people who'd not yet been captured or killed. And they capture, at the end of chapter 7, the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. Great names, if you want to choose a name for your children. And they execute them, and then they come across their own people in the territory of Ephraim, one of the tribes of Israel. And then as we move through chapter... Have we got a full screen here? No? Okay, let's just kill that, forget it. As we move through chapter 8, we find some signs of decline. First in the nation, and then in Gideon himself. And the first face of this decline is seen in the opening verses. Remember in the first session, we talked about that sliding spiral of what was repeating in the nation. How sin leads to slavery. And then in their slavery, they cry out to God for a deliverer, and he sends them a deliverer. And so from sin, we come through slavery into salvation. And God hears their prayer. But then time and time again, what happens is they climb back up that spiral to the top again and start sliding back down. And so that's what's happening here. They have been saved. God had sent a deliverer in Gideon. But just that gradual creeping in of sin again is starting. And they're on their way back up. They're at it again. And sin disguises itself. It disguises itself in different forms and has different faces. And we're going to just look at 4 different faces of sin here in chapter 8. And the first one is the sin of jealousy. Let me give you a quick summary of the incident here without going into too much detail. The tribe of Ephraim had got their nose out of joint, basically because they weren't asked to be involved in the action. And you know, if you're a big guy, and Ephraim was one of the biggest tribes in Israel, if you're a big guy, you don't like it when the little guy gets the glory, okay? It's happening with Liverpool and Newcastle at the moment, if you know the subtext of our culture. But if you're the big guy, you don't like the little guy getting the glory. And that's what's happening here. You know what Gideon said about himself? He's from the weakest clan of the insignificant tribe of Manasseh. And they've got the audacity to beat up the Midianites. And the biggest tribe has not been invited to the party. So they're not very pleased. That's basically, in a summary, what's going on here in the opening verses. But the issue, the heart issue, is one of pride. You see, pride so often leads to jealousy. And instead of rejoicing that somebody else has been successful, what we tend to do, it's human nature, it's sinful human nature within us, is that we feed that seed of pride and jealousy. And when we allow it to grow within us, what happens is that it turns into a bitter root that starts to destroy us and spill over and affects other people around us. Because you see, jealous people can't ever hide their jealousy. That's why the book of Hebrews says, see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, and no bitter or root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. Because sin always spreads and affects other people. That's why it needs to be cut out before it spreads, a bit like weeds in a garden. If we allow them to develop, then they will take over. And Gideon's diplomacy here in those opening verses wins the day. He cuts this in the bud, and he reminds them that by capturing the Midianite princes on their territory was a greater coup than the battle he'd won, and they're appeased by that. And it says their anger against him subsided when he said this. But it doesn't take long before in the following paragraphs, what's happening in the nation starts to surface, and it reads like a further clash with his own team. The men of two towns, Succoth, Penuel, were asked for support to sustain Gideon's small army as he pursues the Midianites. They churlishly refuse it because, again, they're not involved. And so not only do we see the sign of jealousy, but in verse 4 through 17, we see disunity develop. Now, Israel was a small enough nation as it is, without this infighting taking place. We don't need to discuss in detail. You can read the story for yourself. I hope you do. But it reveals a dangerous fault line that's running through the whole nation at this time. As you read on in the book of Judges, which is not a very pleasant read if you read it because of the infighting, the disunity that develops throughout the coming years, tribe fighting against tribe, culminating in the total anarchy in that final famous verse where it says everyone just did what was right in his own eyes. Total disunity in the nation. Everyone going their own way. No leader to follow because they didn't put God in his right place. And everyone is just disunited and unhappy in the process because people are being killed all over the place. And the people of God, more than any, should be the people that demonstrate unity. And what applies to Israel applies even more so to a church. We may all be from the same denomination or the same congregation, the same tribe as it were, but we're all the people of God. And one of the insidious sins that so often creeps into the community of the people of God is that sin of disunity, of doing your own thing, of independence, of dislocating from the sense of being body, fighting and competing with each other. And when you go into the book of Acts, it starts off with great unity. The church were all together of one accord. And it doesn't take very long, in fact, into just the 5th chapter of the book of Acts, before that seed is planted. And what happens is that two people, a husband and wife, start to show signs of independence and selfishness, which leads to disunity. And Peter intervenes quite dramatically, quite specifically. And we may say that he is too harsh in what he does, in the same way as we would say, as we read chapter 8 here in Judges, that you think that Gideon's intervention appears to be too harsh. But in both cases, what they're doing is they're spotting the implications of allowing this disunity to continue. And so they rooted out quite viciously, it would seem, but it was necessary to stop the rot in the community of God. However, the signs of decline, or the sins of decline, if you like, now ironically switch from the nation of Israel and start to affect Gideon, the leader himself. And as we come to this third face of sin in chapter 8, it's disguised. As we come down to verse 24, if you've got your Bible, follow it with me. This sin is now disguised behind the face of prosperity. You say to me, but prosperity is not a sin. And you're right, in and of itself. But it's a wide and a dangerous road that can very easily lead to sin. Arthur Kundal in his commentary says this. He says, Gideon, who came through the test of adversity with flying colors, was not the first nor the last to be less successful in the test of prosperity. Maybe that's why Proverbs says, some of my favorite verses from that book, the writer prays to the Lord, give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that's needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who's the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. How did the decline in Gideon's life come about? How did one who was 1 week a hero and a great man of faith end up ultimately in a place of mediocrity? Well, the greatest moment of rejecting that glory for himself, I said to you, makes way to the greatest mistake. As in verse 24, what does he do? He requests gold earrings that they captured as spoil in the battle. You may say, understandably, what's the big deal here? And in itself, it may not have been too bad in Gideon's mind. It may have been initially an innocent request, but I'm not so sure. Because when you dig deeper, you discover that we're talking here about at least 60 pounds of gold. Now, in any generation, gold's been valuable. And I just asked Google to help me out on this one. How much is 60 pounds of gold worth? And we're talking here about approximately 1.2 million pounds in our currency. So whatever currency you translate it into in whatever generation, we're talking here a lot of gold. Talking here a lot of dosh, really, if you cash it in. And what was he going to do with all these earrings? Well, I know my wife's got a lot of earrings, but 135,000 sets of earrings even beats her. Well, he probably melts it all down, and it says that he makes an ephod. What's an ephod, you ask me? Well, an ephod was actually a priestly garment that was made out of gold. Why was he making a priestly garment? We're not told. It's possible that what's happening here that is in his mind, because he's become the leader, he actually assumes a position that God had never given him, and he is trying to replace the priesthood that Moses has instituted, and he's trying to take on that role for himself. We don't know. We're not told. All that we are told is that the result was negative. And it says here that all Israel whored after it. In other words, it became in and of itself an object of worship. You see, when people don't worship God, they have to replace that object of worship with something else. It might be a car, it might be a house, it might be a family, it might be an ephod in this generation. And so they start to worship what Gideon had made. But his prosperity extended beyond the ephod. I'm quite sure there was a lot of gold left over. And as we read into the text, we don't know, but there's enough said to reveal that Gideon adopted a lavish lifestyle that totally contradicted what he said in verse 23. He said, I don't want to be a king, but then after that he starts to live as though he were a king. And we can see this as we slide now into that lavish lifestyle that gives way to the fourth face of sin. Not only the face of jealousy and the face of disunity, and in Gideon now the face of prosperity, we find finally that we see the face of immorality surface. For a start, we're told he had a harem, whatever you call it, lots of women, lots of wives. Only rulers in that day could afford this Canaanite practice, because as you all know, a wife's very expensive, so he's got lots of them. He also had a concubine. What's a concubine? Well, in today's terms, probably best described as a mistress. So what's happening is that his morality is slowly being shaped by the pagan society all around him. Then what else happens? He names his son from his concubine Abimelech. And when you translate what Abimelech means, it actually translates as, my father is king. What has he said? I don't want to be king. What does he name his child? You see, there's a contradiction going on here, what he had said and what he now is practicing. And for someone who said he didn't want to be king, he's living a lifestyle that betrays the opposite, and he's also being led into the immoral practices of the Canaanite tribes and nation around him. There are lessons here for us all. Not only do we constantly need to be aware of the sinister, corrupting power of prosperity, but we must guard against that insidious immorality that can start to affect a person's life and a group of people if they allow it in. Gradually, what I mean by that is that the grip of materialism or the compromise of just lowering your moral standards can invade and can infect a church community so easily. Because what happens is, in our efforts as a church to open the front door wide enough to make it comfortable for the society around us to enter in without feeling judged, we very easily can absorb then the mentality and the morality and the lifestyle of the society that now is entering. And before long, what happens is that as you look at that community of people, you fail to see the distinction between those who belong to Jesus and are professing a different kind of life to those who've mingled amongst them who've not yet found that distinction of life. And what happens so easily is that the corruption and the immorality of the world, the society around us, infects the church rather than the other way round of the morality of biblical discipleship infecting the rest of societies. Gideon is a lesson to us in that. He starts the race at a slow pace. He was running well, but he gets distracted before he reaches the finishing line. And as we move on, and we don't have time to do this, recommend that in your own time you read chapter 9 as well, because we see the legacy he left was not a good one. You can best measure whether you finish well by the legacy you leave behind. Have we made disciples who not only commence but continue and then complete the race? Have we affected and led and influenced our children that we've left behind? And will they still follow the Lord? I know in many cases it's not just our choice for them, but their choice as well. But the tragedy here is that as we look on into the family of Gideon, in the next chapter, there's division, there's sense of godlessness in his family. He leaves a bad legacy. I don't want to end this series on a negative note. The example of Gideon is redeemed by the example of Jesus. It says that he ran with endurance the race set before him. He endured the cross, and he is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. As we look to Jesus instead of Gideon, we see the example. We see the one who went through the pressures of his life, the temptation to give up, the pressures of the cross, and as an example, he leaves every disciple with the same challenge, the challenge of enduring their cross like he did. Not going to a cross of Calvary, but by dying to self, by dying to immorality, by dying to materialism around us, by saying no to the pressure of society, and enduring and completing the race. And so the Apostle Paul reminds us also that every athlete exercises self-control in all things. So he says, I don't run aimlessly. I discipline my body and I keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. The Apostle Paul, the great apostle, constantly keeping his eye on the ball and recognizing that wherever you are in your Christian life, however mature you might think you are, nobody is at a stage, and I remind myself constantly of this, where if you think you stand, Paul says, beware lest you fall. It's not starting that is important, it's completing. And so Paul could say, thankfully at the end of his life, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. What lessons, as we close, can we extract from the life of Gideon? What have we learned? Well, let me just pinpoint some of the headlines. God comes to us when we're defeated, when we're feeling disillusioned, and he gives us a bigger plan for our life. Maybe you're sitting there in that space of maybe just feeling that life's gone all wrong. And you, like Gideon, are feeling nobody could change it for you, and you're the last person that anyone would choose to do anything for God. Well, God comes to Gideon, picks him up, uses him dramatically. And God uses those we saw last week who feel weak rather than those who feel strong. And I guess that qualifies most of us here today. We also learned last week that it's the broken vessel that releases the light, and that we have this treasure of the gospel in jars of clay. Our weakness qualifies us rather than disqualifies us. And the light of Jesus in our hearts, when we're broken enough to admit our vulnerability, the light of Jesus is what shines and makes a difference to the darkness around us. Not us, but Jesus out of us. And also we learn today that it's possible to start well, to even be used mightily by God, but to finish badly. And so as we close and invite Jackie and team back up, I want to use a prayer written by a man called Tom Rayner. And I pray it for all of us, but I pray it firstly for myself. May I be a person of greater moral purity, so indwelled by your word and in prayer, that I am able to resist the temptations of the enemy, that my life shines as an example for you to the watching world. Lord, strengthen me to finish well. In Jesus' name, amen.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord, you give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord, it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord, you give life, you are love, you give light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. We pour out our praise to you, Lord, to your name, God. How good you are, all the earth. So the earth will shout your praise, our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. So the earth will And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys really enjoyed that. We're looking forward to seeing you hopefully at the gathering, which again is going to be on Sunday the 24th, and it's going to be at the Queen's Theatre in Barnstaple. No coffee, remember, no coffee, so don't come expecting coffee. Bring your travel mugs. So that's going to be an amazing time, and I hope you have an amazing week, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
My heart is on the run, blinded by pain. Every step I take seems to bruise me. I hear the enemy, he must be close by. My feet are giving in. Your love surrounds me, wipes away wounds, lets me breathe again, moves me forward. I see the path you made in the distance. Help is on the way. So we'll get up now, let go of all our burdens, won't stop running, even when our hearts are breaking. King of glory, ruler over time and seasons, you will never let go. your power. Jesus, our strength. Show our